Hi, everyone. I'm just going to remove this from over here because it's quite annoying. So hi, everyone. I just want to say that technically, I am not from Porto. I'm from Aveiro. I lived about 300 meters away from the borderline, which made me pay way less insurance in my car for some reason. So that's good, I guess. I'm from town near to get you to understand why it's so useful. If you already use it, you're probably going to be bored. I'm sorry. I'm probably going to tell you all the shit that you already know. If you don't use it, it may be interesting, maybe not. Always welcome to leave. There's not a lot of light, so that's good. I can't see you. So I really love GraphQL. And I want to point out that I started as a front-end engineer that just like, I got hired by my previous company because I could do CSS. That was the only reason I got hired. I didn't know any JavaScript besides jQuery. And at a certain point, I don't know what happened in my life that I started creating GraphQL APIs. I have no idea. Don't know. So by starting over, I want to tell that my name is Sarah, that my mouse is in the middle of the screen. That's quite annoying. So my name, oh, fucking hell. OK, why is that still there? What does that say? Next slide. OK, cool. That's not too bad. Just give me a second. There we go. OK. I'll just stand here. People tell you, like, 2 slides in code. It's great. It's going to make you look smart. It never does. It never does. It always fucks up somehow. So my name is Sarah. I am originally from a very small town near Espinho, where there's about 5K people, which is less people that there are in the Apollo Slack, which is the biggest thing used for GraphQL in the front end, which is sad. More for them, because I had to handle that Slack. Pretty happy for me. I'm OK with that. I'm a developer advocate at a company called YLD. We have offices in London, Porto, and Lisbon. And if you ask me what a developer advocate does, I have no idea. I learn things, and then I try to teach them to other people. I mostly fail at both, but didn't get fired yet, so yay. As like for personal things, so that people know that I'm not a robot, I just want to say that since I've done like 40 conferences last year, people assumed that I was like a humanoid or something, and I'm just like, no, OK. So I added this. I'm really into horrible, horrible movies. Who has seen Sharknado, for example? It's bloody amazing. I don't know why I said bloody. I lived in the UK for like 3 months, for fuck's sake. But I really love those types of movies. I don't know why. Like, watching people fail on screen like gives me life for some reason. And as a true Portuguese person, I am really into football because that's pretty much all we got. That and Cork, so we gotta play with what we got. I am also a core contributor on Code Sandbox. That is not well typed. Great. That is the good typing. So I'm also a core contributor of Code Sandbox. If you've never used Code Sandbox, it's a online code editor for the web. So it basically means that you can just create React, Angular, Vue, Node projects all on the internet. And it's really nice. And it really lowers the barrier of entry if you want to learn something new like React, for example. Because you don't have to set up Webpack, because no one wants to set up Webpack. OK, so I'm going to start with the very basics of what is GraphQL. And if you go to their website, it says that GraphQL is a query language for your API. And I just want to say that this means absolutely nothing. I have no idea what this means. Also, there are, I think, 2 things that are absolutely, like, they're just wrong in here. So first of all, GraphQL is not a language. It's a spec. It's not a real language. There is a GraphQL query language, which is a completely different thing. And also, there is no graphs in it. And you can query anything with it, not just APIs. So this is the worst sales pitch that I've actually ever heard in my life. Query language for your API, yay. So it's basically a way to query data. It doesn't have to be an API. You can query a Postgres database, a MongoDB database, a fuck ton of JSON files, you name it. You can query it with GraphQL. Maybe not human beings. I'm not sure. Never tried. But you can do anything you want with it. I made an entire meme website out of GraphQL. You can do anything you want. And I'll show you some actual examples of really like what the fuck things that people made, which is just one, but. OK, so my next question is, why should you care about this? You shouldn't, because you're not a nerd. But if you are a nerd, you should care because of like a couple of things that I'm going to mention. Who in here is a front-end developer? OK, who in here is a back-end developer? Because front-end developers are easier to fucking hell. Front-end developers are easier to make like, oh, this is no loading states. And they're like, oh, my God, this is amazing. We don't need it. We don't ask for a lot in life. We use jQuery for a long time. OK, one good thing for anyone who uses, I've heard that PHP now has some typing support, or Ruby, or any language that doesn't have typings, like JavaScript, for example, is that GraphQL APIs have a strongly typed schema. And by that I mean we have types, and that is about it. But I'll explain why I think this is so good. And so, GQL is what actually stands for GraphQL Query Language. GraphQL itself is not a language, it's a spec. So a spec is basically like CSS. CSS, or JavaScript, before it was actually implemented, it was just a spec. It wasn't anything. It was just a piece of paper that was worthless. Yeah, it was worthless. And so that is what GraphQL is. If no one implemented what they wanted, it would never be anything. So it's actually not a language. And this is just like, this is just a string, technically, basically. Node basically counts this as a string. It doesn't care. OK, so let's say that you have a Talks website, because I made a Talks website, and it's just easier if I focus on things that I did and not try to make shit up. And so you have two types. One of them is a talk. And for the simplicity's sake, let's just say that for each talk, there's only one speaker. I'm aware that there's a talk here that has two speakers. I'm sorry. But what it means is that every talk will have a name, and that name is of type string. If you try to put an integer in there, it will not let you, because it's of type string, and it's just a string. And then you have a speaker. And then I'm just saying that speaker is equal to speaker. And that is because there is no such idea in GraphQL of an object. Everything must be typed. I don't know why my hand's in my pocket, because I'm so cool. Everything must be typed. So if it's an object, you need to know what's inside of that object. You can't just say, like, it's an object, and they're like, no, fuck you. You need to tell me what's there. And so you have to say, like, a speaker is of type speaker that has all of these things. And it can receive more things, but it won't care about what else you bring, and it will just won't show it to you. So it has an ID, and this thing, the exclamation point, means that it's required. So if your endpoint or anything doesn't send back an ID, it's going to be like, no, you need an ID, and you didn't send me an ID. And a type ID is just a fancy type string, basically. And you have a name that's also a string, a photo that is a string. It's usually another object that's a type file, but for simplicity's sake. And you have talks, which is of type talk, but it has a weird bracket under it, and that means that it's an array of talks. So it can be 1, it can be 1,000, depending on how proliferate. No, that's not a word. How many talks you do. OK, one good thing that I like is that it's framework agnostic. Like, I don't think anyone wins anything from the framework wars. Besides, I don't think anyone wins. I mean, there's a lot of really fun fights that I see sometimes, and I'm just like, what? But it's framework agnostic. What this means is that it doesn't care what you're using. It will always work. And I think this is a really good thing, because it stops the fights of like, oh, you can only use GraphQL if you use Vue. No, you can use it with anything. Yeah, I can make really weird shit with my voice. It's a talent. Not a very good one, but a talent. OK, but it's also language agnostic. And the reason I'm telling you this is because GraphQL was released at a Facebook conference, because Facebook has conferences now. Yeah, I know. Can't wait for that to die. That's going to be great. But Facebook has conferences, and they released GraphQL in a Facebook conference. And they released it at a React event owned by Facebook, and released it with the GraphQL JS implementation. So everyone assumed that GraphQL, because also they did a really bad job at telling people that it wasn't, they all assumed it was a React thing and a Node thing, which is absolutely not true. So it's not a Node thing. It's not a React thing. It's not anything. It's a piece of paper that someone implemented. And this means that it's framework agnostic and that it's language agnostic. And I'm just going to show you some of the languages that use it. And who in here knows what TypeScript is? OK, so I put TypeScript as a language because it's not JavaScript, and y'all need to stop pretending like it is. It's a completely different language. So you have JavaScript, TypeScript, Ruby, and PHP, and Python are 3 languages that are not typed, so they can actually use, also JavaScript, yes, are languages that could actually use this. And there's also like really new languages like Elixir, which is like pretty recent, and Rust, but there's also really old things like Perl and .NET. That's still a thing, mostly .NET. And there's also names that look like ballerina dancers, like Crystal. I don't know what that is, but if someone does, this is one of those things that I feel you shouldn't Google on your own and like just Google that. Like that time I tried to buy a coffee grinder on Amazon, and I just stopped Grindr. That was not a good idea. You need to specify that it's a programming language. I needed to specify it was a coffee grinder. That was the thing. Also, ClojureScript is Clojure, but it's like TypeScript. It goes back to JavaScript, and I have no idea how you write a GraphQL endpoint in SQL, but I guess it's possible. You get the point. It's usable in not every language, I'm sure, but it's usable in most languages, and it's also usable in most frameworks. You don't need to use React and Webpack and Node to do this. You can do this with anything. And you don't need to rewrite your entire app, because GraphQL, unlike REST, uses one endpoint. So there is a GraphQL endpoint that you post to, which, yeah, it's really weird that you always post to get things. Just let's leave it at that. But you post always to that endpoint, and what you send as a JSON is what defines what you get. So you always have one endpoint. So if you have a huge REST API, you can just get from that REST API. And you don't need to create a whole new thing. OK, who in here likes Swagger? Oh, really? You like Swagger? OK. Who in here likes to write things for Swagger? Do not raise your hand. I don't even know. OK, so I thought that Swagger was great until I realized that all developers had to write those things, and that wasn't automatic. And I was like, I am so sorry. That sounds terrible. So one good thing that I think GraphQL does is that it has automatic documentation. And what I mean by this is that you have to type all of your schema. So you have to say that you can, of the type talk, you receive a name that is a string. So GraphQL can use this to create documentation for you. So every time you go search for things, you can say, OK, I have a speaker, and this returns a name and ID, and and it tells me what the types are. This is not like absolutist documentation. You can also add comments that will show in the documentation, which is really good, so you never have to write documentation again. No one likes to write. I know one person literally in the entire world who's a developer and likes to write documentation, but that's because she was a journalist. So that doesn't count. So I know no one. UI editor is the worst term, but I didn't know how to find a better one. So you know what Postman or Insomnia or something like that is? So there are things like that, but for GraphQL. And they work in a browser, usually. So one of the things that is GraphQL Playground. And GraphQL Playground was created by a company in Berlin called Prisma. Prism is a different thing than Prisma. It's really hard. But it's basically a tool that allows you to make queries to an endpoint. So you put the endpoint here, and you make queries to it and see the data that you receive. So all of this is on the internet. So you usually, when you create a GraphQL API, you usually get this by default. They just give you this. Like, it's free. You can just take it. It's usually just a thing of saying playground equals true. Not equals, like double quotes. True. Do not put equals. And there is also GraphQL, which was the one that was, damn, that is white. It's like my neighborhood in Berlin. So I don't know why I ended up living in like the white neighborhood of Berlin. I didn't even know that was a thing. So GraphQL was released by Facebook when they released GraphQL, I think, or around that time. It's still maintained, but as a personal preference, I really like GraphQL Playground more because it's more maintained by the community. GraphQL is mostly just maintained by Facebook. And also, this doesn't have a dark theme, but this one has a white theme, so yay, equal rights. Just get all the themes. Honestly, I think the best thing about GraphQL doesn't matter to any back-end person in here, it matters to the front-end people, is that you get what you asked for. And what I mean by this is that if you ever go to the GitHub API, the GitHub API is the most RESTful API that I've ever seen in my life. This is not a bad thing. I'm not saying it's a bad thing. I'm just saying it's just a fact. And so if you get a repo, you're going to get a ton of crap that you don't need. And you're going to waste a lot of bandwidth and a lot of like network things, because like not a lot of people have really fast internet. I mean, we do in Portugal, but I found out that we have one of the fastest internets in the EU. And the fastest internet is Romania. The more you know. I have no idea why I just said that, but the fastest internet is Romania. The more you know. So one good thing is that, imagine that all you want is the talk's name, but for every talk. If you have a REST endpoint, and do not tell me you can do this with a REST endpoint, I am aware. But with GraphQL, you can just say that you just want to type talk. You can also define this in the REST endpoint, but GraphQL was built specifically for that. So you can just say, I want talks, and for that, I just want a name. And it will just give you the name of every single talk. And it's great because you literally only get what you asked. And I can show you that on Code Sandbox now that I can actually type the thing that I do. Oh no, did I open in the same? Didn't I? I did. OK, I'll do that later. So, OK. So this is GraphQL Playground, which I can put in white if you want. That makes it better. That makes it so much worse, doesn't it? That's GraphQL all the time. I'm just going to bump up the text. OK. So schema is basically your definition all the things that you can query. This is for a website that I made a couple new tab, maybe? Yes? Oh my God, why are you so bad to me, Chrome? Always show toolbar. There we go. So it's just a website that highlights a couple of like talks that are, I think are good by the community, and you can also add your own talks, and it also has a dark theme. It's great. So this is the example that I usually give because it was made from the ground up with using GraphQL. So it has videos, it has a ton of stuff that I put in that I'll never actually use, but we'll focus on the videos and the speakers. So we have a thing here. So this is all of the queries that I can do. And so there's no mutations here. There's only queries. The difference between queries and mutations, you can think of queries as gets and mutations as posts. So mutations actually change things. And so I'm going to go to all queries, and I can see something here that is, well, the mutations are here. Never mind. So I can get all talks, which is all videos for some reason. And as you can see, like this whole thing is created automatically. Not this, but this. So the type video implements a node that has a created ad, which is a date time. It has a description. It has a duration, an ID, and it's published, a link, and just a ton of stuff. And from this, you can just carry on searching things. So it has a speaker. Makes sense. So I can click on this, and it's an array of speakers. So I can click on the speaker, and I see that speaker implements this, which has all of these things. And you have a thing here called country equals countries. And this means that it's an enum. I don't know if the concept of enum exists. I think it does exist everywhere. So an enum is basically like if you have something that can either be red, yellow, or green, an enum basically means that it can only be red, yellow, or green. So I literally copied and pasted a JSON file from the internet. And it just stops me from adding weird things as the country. So that also supports enums, and I'm going to show you how you can query things. So as you can see, in the type of video, I have a bunch of stuff. So I'm going to close this. Oh, I can do this. I didn't know that. That's cool. So you say query all speakers, and this means that it's a query, so I'm going to get something, and I just give it a name. So by default, everything is a query, and you don't actually have to give it a name. So you can also do this, which is the exact same thing. And I'm going to say, I want to get all speakers. And there's also auto-completion, which is great. Let me tell you that. And I just want to get the ID of every speaker. And there you go. So these are all the speakers and their IDs. And let me just get a name so we can get like a name to the face, to the ID, which is kind of weird that I just get IDs. So yeah, there we go. I have no idea why there is a Dan Abramov 2, but there are 2 Dan Abramovs now. That is great. So you can see that I literally only asked for the ID and the name, and that's what I got. I didn't get anything else, even though I have a ton of stuff. So if I click Option space, or something space on Windows, you can also get a whole bunch of other stuff. So like I have the photo, I have the topics of each speaker, and I have their Twitter, the last time it was updated, and I also have videos, which is poorly typed, I'm sorry, I know. But I'll explain what happened there. I typed videos, and I didn't know that I was going to add an E and an S to the end of it. So from each video, I can get the name of the talk, for example. And I do this. And now I will get all speakers, an ID, a name, and the talk that Ryan Florence has, and the 3 talks that Dan Abramov has, apparently, on this website. And so this usually in a REST endpoint, of course you can make it to work like this as well, but this usually in a REST endpoint are 2 different APIs, 2 different calls. So you have the all talks, for example, and then that returns usually the ID of the talk, and then from the ID of the talk, you can get like /talk/ID/speakers or something like that. And that is not really how REST works, but kind of is. And yeah, so you can like do weird shit with this. So for example, if I want to go back, I can say that from the videos, I want to get the speaker. And from the speaker, I get a name. And it's just little, which I think is an amazing thing. Because if you go to the GitHub API, I really want to show the GitHub API. GitHub API repo. It gives you so many things. So if you go here and you say like, get. This is an amount of stupid amount of things that the GitHub API gives you every time you request a repo, which is insane. This screen is 1,980 by 1,280. This is huge. So you can imagine how much of a bandwidth spend this is when you just want to get like the owner login or something. You literally just want one thing, and it sends you like a gazillion of things. So actually, they have a GraphQL API now, which only works if you're logged in, which is kind of shit. But, well, it's something. And I think this is my biggest example, is that if you want to get, so if you get all repositories, if you get a repository, then you have a URL for like the branches, for example, and you have a URL for the comments or for the commits or something like that. So you have to go through a huge thing like this, get that URL, go to that URL, and get all of the things to maybe just get one thing, which is, not all of us have fast internet. I used to live in a place that had, like, I call that the Node.js of internets, because it was incredibly single-threaded. Like, you could only do one thing at a time in that internet. Like, if I was having a call and at the same time I opened a page, no, that you can't do that. And some of us have those types of internets. And when it comes to the front end is amazing when it comes to GraphQL. So I was used to dealing with REST APIs, and a lot of times it was with REST APIs already made, so the backend developers weren't with me, so I couldn't just be like, yo, dude, I need this. They would be like in the US. So that wouldn't be a thing. And we ended up having to manipulate a lot of data on the front end, which is not what we were supposed to do. So there are tools like Apollo. Apollo is the most widely used tool to handle GraphQL in the front end and in Node as well. Also works for Swift and Java. Android, I'm not sure about Kotlin, sorry. So tools like Apollo handle all of the loading and all of the error states for you. So they just give you a thing, and it tells you, like, here is the error, here is the loading. You don't have to see when it's loading and set up, like, a global state. And, like, you have no idea how many is-loading states I've set in my entire life. I have set so many is-loading states. And I haven't done that in a while. It's great. Also, caching. So the GraphQL, Apollo works in a way that it actually caches things for you. So you don't have to do caching. Because caching is one of the most terrible things in programming. It's really hard. It's really hard. They also, like, invalidate your cache and everything. It's great. We all hate caching and naming, so it's great. And like I said, it supports a ton of frameworks. I'm going to show 3, which are the most widely used frameworks. And it supports a lot more, but I'm just going to show you examples of 3. So the first one, no, that's the second one. Oh, my God. So the first one is React. And React works with the render props pattern, which is a thing that came out like I think like a year ago or something. So what this is a query component, and it only requires one prop, which is the query. Makes sense. There's also a mutation component that only requires a mutation. And you pass in the query. So you pass it in that GQL thing that says, OK, I want to query all speakers and get the ID, for example. And then it returns a function that contains the loading, the error, and the data that you got. So you can just check, like, if it's loading, just return loading. If it's an error, just do not return just the error message. That would be a terrible idea. So if none of these things are true because you returned, this means that you have data. So if you have data, in this case, you just get a bunch of dogs, and you just, like, map all over the dogs. And this is, like, all that you need to do in order to return something that already handles loading states for you. So another thing that you can do is just abstract all of this part to its own component. So if you have an app or a website or an app, like, most of your error and loading states are going to be the same. If they're not, please talk to your designer. But 90% of the times, your error states and loading states will be the same, so you can just reuse that. This is the only part that you really need to do every single time. This is Vue. So Vue works in a way where you have an Apollo query component, so these things in Vue basically mean that whatever is in front of this is supposed to be evaluated by Vue. If you don't have anything, like class doesn't have anything in front of it, it's not evaluated by Vue. So, but if you have 2 dots before class, it means that these 2 things are variables. So you pass it a query, and inside of it, you just require another file. You can also just pass it normally. I usually just require another file. And then you get a slot scope, results, and you get the same thing. So you check if it's loading, if it's an error, if it's data. You can do the exact same thing and just abstract this somewhere else. I don't know Angular, but here's Angular. So I don't know Angular, I'm sorry. But I did copy it here. So basically, you need to define what the current user is. In this case, we're getting users, and it's any. And the loading is Boolean, and basically, when I think how that works is that it constantly watches a query. Like, it keeps, like, it watches what you just sent, and you just need to set this current user, which is what you can actually access in the template. as data that current user, for example, and loading as the same thing. So it's also not bad at all. And you also get the Apollo type. And like I said, since GraphQL is just a spec, there is no limit to what you can build, which is good. I like that. That's nice. One of the things that I actually use a lot is something called Apollo link state. So if you build enormous apps in the front end, you usually need a state management. In React, the most popular one is Redux. Unfortunately, I don't like Redux. Unfortunately for me, I don't like Redux. And so Apollo link state, what it does is that it acts your cache that it already exists by Apollo to handle all your data, and makes that the base thing for all of your stuff. So you can query things from your cache, which is basically just a global store. It's the big JSON file, basically. It's not a JSON file, it's just a huge object, because everything in JavaScript is an object. There's also this thing, which I love with all of my heart, which is called GraphQL CSS. And it does exactly what you think it does. You write CSS, and it spits out you write GraphQL, and it spits out CSS. And if you think Portugal never did anything decent, they did this. It's the dude from London who's originally from Portugal who built this. And it's beautiful, and I love him. And so, yeah, you can make anything that you want. I made a thing of you can query Figma to get the information of a document to even build a thing using GraphQL. I made a fucking meme website of photos of me using GraphQL. You can make anything with GraphQL because you just have a spec. It's just a set of guidelines. Yay. We never actually escaped the design talk. So it's just a set of guidelines to make sure that you have a better way to get data from an API, from a database, from a JSON file, from wherever you want. And it's just a set of these things. It's not anything written in stone. It's literally written in a piece of paper. And you can get things like GraphQL CSS out of it, which I think is actually don't use this in production, obviously. But it's kind of funny that this dude just learned GraphQL and the next day he built this. I have no idea. So if you like the idea of GraphQL and you want to learn GraphQL, also points if you are either a front-end developer or are a node developer, which are two different things. So if you do want to learn GraphQL, I have a workshop online that is free. I'm not trying to sell you anything. I do have to pay for the domain, so I'm technically, don't go there. Kidding, I don't care. So it's at letslearngraphql.com. So it was a workshop that I recorded in Kiev, in Ukraine, and they were really nice to record the whole thing and give me the videos to put online. So it's completely free. It uses React and Node, and for the databases, it uses Postgres, because that was the time when I was like, you know what's cool? Postgres is really cool. So I ended up using Postgres. I have no idea why. At least it's not Mongo, I guess. I don't know. So yeah, so that's what I have. You can find my slides at 99problem. That is a really huge URL. I can just tweet that out. That sounds like a better idea. And yeah, thank you so much for having me. And let me know if you have any questions or if you want to go for food or coffee.